The brand new Godzilla film titled Godzilla Minus One has just been a massive achievement in the Godzilla franchise. For me, it was my favorite film of the year, and I really think that it's my favorite Godzilla film in the entire franchise. And it's just been receiving tons of praise and high reviews by fans, critics. Even the director of the American 2014 reboot is really praising it.
The whole time, very, very jealous. I was like, I should have made this. Like, why didn't I make a movie like this?
But the film's epic conclusion has played a significant role in its near universal acclaim. So I wanted to do a spoiler review discussing it. And hopefully I could get some insight from everyone in the comments, so feel free to comment. So once again, this will be a spoiler review. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, get out and do so. And seriously, I really can't praise this film enough. It has great action, great effects, it's emotional, has great characters, and above all, it's just an excellent Godzilla film. So now on to the spoiler review. So just recapping the film, the movie follows the character of Koichi. He's a former kamikaze pilot, but he's failed to die in battle. Instead, he got out of it by lying and saying his jet wasn't working. So he goes and gets it fixed on Odo Island. This is where he first encounters Godzilla. And Godzilla here is in a much weaker and smaller form. He's more like a dinosaur than the giant that we know him as. And I actually really like this opening scene with Godzilla. I thought it was just a great way to introduce the monster. It's really dark, and you just see Godzilla just killing everyone. And one thing to note is that Godzilla doesn't eat anyone. He just kills them. And it's as if he's just really pissed off at humanity and just wants to destroy everything. Also, just as a side note, I wanted to point out that when we were watching previews, all of a sudden just 20 kids come in. And just immediately I knew these kids were going to be a pain in the ass. And of course they were just yelling obscenities. And I did see someone to get up to complain, but the funny thing is, as soon as the movie started and they found out that it was in subtitles, they immediately all just got up at once and left. I was so happy. I don't even know why they would show up to a foreign film. Maybe just because they saw the title Godzilla. But I just kind of wanted to point it out. You know, this was my experience. I don't know how your audience was. And the first few lines of dialogue were missed because of this. And unfortunately, that wasn't it. Another thing I noticed too was other teenagers just constantly getting up in front of me and coming back with more food or whatever. And of course, I'm in the aisle of just the kids that want to constantly get up and come back. And, you know, you notice that people do this during the story and dialogue moments of the film. So I'm beginning to think that people only watch movies for action. No one really cares about story anymore. And I think that's really sad. Also, I don't know if people just chug a bunch of water before they see a movie. Because how hard is it to just sit for a movie and not get up? And it's not like it was even a 3-hour film. So that was my experience seeing this. Thankfully, the film outweighed that, so that wasn't the first thing I thought of when I left. But I think movies should just make everything rated R from now on. That way you don't get annoying teenagers coming in. Anyway, that's my side rant. Let's get on with the movie. So in the beginning, we watch as the main character, Koichi, struggles just to make a new life in the ruins of Tokyo post-war. And along with him, there's also a young woman named Noriko. And she finds this abandoned baby, and she decides to take care of her. And her name is Akiko. And was it me, or did all of you find the main character Koichi to be somewhat of an asshole? I know that he's got his problems, he's just getting out of a major war, he has survivor's guilt, but I feel like he should just take some responsibility. I mean, the kid is calling him dad, and also Noriko obviously really likes him, but also I get that it's part of his growth. He becomes a better person as the movie goes on. But I will say he does take some responsibility by taking on a dangerous job to feed his family. And I really liked how they showed how they disarmed mines back then. It seemed like a really dangerous job, but it's crazy because people actually did that in real life. And it's just crazy when you think about it, how just thousands of those mines were just dumped into the ocean. Let's never have a major war again. It was also pretty clever how they used this method of disarming mines as a way to fight Godzilla. And this method is really what showed Godzilla's weak point. Apparently, he could be injured on the inside of his body. Also, I feel like we've never seen Godzilla just regenerate his body like this before. I feel like the effects too looked really good. So, at this point in the story, it seems like the rest of Tokyo seems to be finally just making some progress in rebuilding everything. But now Godzilla, in his gigantic and powerful new form, attacks the city. And he becomes so powerful because of the infamous Bikini Atoll nuclear tests, which also happened in real life. And I think that the attack of Ginza was definitely a highlight of the film. The level of destruction has never looked this real or as good in any other Godzilla film. Or any movie for that matter. And it was actually really emotional, at least for me, just seeing people run in terror as Godzilla crushed them. And this is where we see Noriko in the train car. And if you've seen the original Godzilla from 1954, this is actually a callback. This happened in that film too. And this is a famous scene where Godzilla is chomping on the train. And I just love callbacks like that. And of course they also brought back the original score, and I just got chills when I heard that. So while Godzilla's chomping on the train, Noriko's in it and she's just hanging for her life. And I felt like that was a bit much for that character. I mean, what is she, some gymnast to hang like that? But I guess it created some suspense and action. And this whole attack of the city is just a mirror of the original film where Godzilla destroyed that city. It had the train, like I said, the reporters on the rooftop, and of course, the atomic breath. And if you watch this film back to back with the original, which I recommend doing, you could really just see how this new one just upped and made everything more intense. And I do always credit the original. I think it still has a very creepy feel about that film. Even when Godzilla wasn't on screen, you still felt his presence. And I feel like this film didn't really have that same feeling. But still, we've just come a long way with this one. And this one is obviously more entertaining. And this is where we get to my favorite part of the film. And this is where Godzilla charges his atomic breath. And when this happens, I just got so hyped. I know it was terrifying for everyone in the movie, but for the audience, everyone was saying how awesome it was. And I just love the way they did it, how they had each spine just go up and turn blue. And then he shoots it, and it's like this mega cannon. It's really the equivalent of a real-life Kamehameha. And I just liked how it brought such levels of destruction that mimicked an actual atomic bomb attack. So when you watch it, it feels like you're watching a serious war film. And it actually makes you think of the real-life destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And could you really imagine just being in a country that not only got firebombs, it had 2 atomic bombs dropped on it, and now you have this giant monster that shoots a cannon that's equal to an atomic bomb. I feel like at that point I'll just give up. And this next part is my least favorite in the film. This is where Noriko bravely saves Koichi. And I don't know if it's just me, and I'm sorry, but I thought this was a dumb scene. And it's even worse when you find out that she survives, and all she has is a bandage on her face. In reality, she would be disintegrated. And it also makes the main protagonist look even more lame. I mean, he already didn't have much going for him, but now we really don't like him. I feel like he could have just grabbed her or something and moved her out of the way. And like, she must be really strong because she really shoves him. I feel like if she tried to shove someone bigger, nothing would happen and they'd both just get hit by the wave. And I also don't even think that he would have survived that blast still. I feel like that building would have collapsed on him. But I do forgive it because I do like the next scene. And this is where we see Koichi just screaming in this desperate rage, while we see Godzilla just walking away slowly in all the ruins of the city. And I think that's the most emotional and powerful scene. It looked amazing. And then it becomes this citizen-led plan in order to defeat Godzilla. And I really liked how the film left it to the working class to handle. I often get bored when movies just focus on the scientists and government officials. I feel like all they do is just talk in a boring room and nothing happens. And it always drags because you just wanted to get back to Godzilla. I feel like this Showa era really used to have a ton of dialogue. And when I revisit those films, I don't know how I was able to watch those as a kid. Because there is just a lot of talking and not much action. And when I think back, I remember other people complaining that it was too much talking. Yet somehow I still love those films. I don't know, maybe I just dozed off during the dialogue and paid attention when Godzilla came on. But I would always love the first time Godzilla would appear. They always really had that build-up pay off. And what's funny too is that's what people complain about the American Monsterverse trilogy. But Godzilla Minus One, I feel like, is finally the film that gets the right balance of dialogue and action. And it did have dialogue in this film, but I felt like all of it was interesting and actually meant something. And it was just really balanced with the action. I also really like the group of friends that we have that follow the main character. And I am glad that none of them died. But I was surprised. Usually you have one or two get killed. We get the nerdy guy with glasses that looks like Otacon from Metal Gear Solid. And he's actually a really important character in this. He's the one that devises the plan on how to defeat Godzilla. I also like the sort of hot-headed drunk guy. He's the one that tells the main character off, and he could pretty much get away with saying anything. And this is when the main character does something stupid and needs a good speaking to. So we find out that the US can't interfere because they don't want to get involved with the Soviet Union. And the Japanese government won't help either. And I thought this was somewhat unrealistic because I feel like in reality, if there was a giant monster or sea dinosaur attacking, I feel like everyone would swarm and film it and want to study it. I don't think every nation would just be like, that's your problem, fix it. But I think what they're trying to get at is just showing what other countries did after World War II. Japan was pretty much left on their own to pick up from starting at zero. Though that's not really entirely true because the US did help Japan rebuild. But I get what they're getting at. I also liked how the movie didn't shy away from criticizing the Japanese government. They brought up how in World War II that their jets didn't have escape hatches, and a lot of the army was just missing stuff that should have been provided. So as for the plan to defeat Godzilla, it involves working class citizens, it involves a minesweeper, a former scientist, a weapons technician, and it involves luring Godzilla into the Bay Area near Tokyo, and then surrounding him with Freon tanks, and then rupturing them. and it causes him to sink extremely quick to 1,500 meters below sea level. And they're hoping that the pressure at that level will crush him. And if that should fail, they do have a plan B. It involves highly pressurized balloons that are going to be inflated underneath Godzilla. And this will cause him to ascend very quickly to the surface and then die due to explosive decompression. And I thought that this plan to use the ocean to defeat Godzilla was very original. I'm not sure about the science, I haven't looked into it, but it definitely makes a lot more sense than the deoxygenation mumbo jumbo of the original. I always thought that was kind of a silly sci-fi thing in a rather serious film. So the plan itself almost goes perfectly. This is with Koichi both luring and distracting Godzilla with a specialized plan. And this is so that the destroyers have enough time to wrap around Godzilla with the Freon tanks. However, as the balloons begin to bring Godzilla back to the surface, he tears through them. And this causes a whole team to use their ships and destroyers and just a whole bunch of citizen-operated tugboats to pull Godzilla to the surface. And when they finally get him to the surface, we find out that Godzilla's injured, but he's still not dead. And then he once again begins to charge up his death ray. Koichi then uses this opportunity while Godzilla's mouth is open to fly into his mouth with explosives. So I gotta say, I really liked the confrontation with Koichi and Godzilla. I liked how Godzilla was just staring him down, and it had the epic music. It was another really powerful moment. Also, again, I just love the use of the original Godzilla soundtrack. And I could tell when they started playing it, the whole audience recognized it too, and everyone was enjoying it. And this whole final confrontation was done really well. The resulting explosion destroys Godzilla's head, and then resulting in his entire body disintegrating into the sea. We then find out that Koichi didn't die because he ejected his seat right before hitting Godzilla. But to his surprise, he also finds out that Noriko is still alive and in the hospital. And while the reunion of the family is joyful, all of a sudden there's a zoom in on Noriko's neck, and it reveals that she's likely suffering from some type of radiation sickness due to being caught up in the blast from Godzilla. So, unfortunately, I already knew that Noriko survived, and this is because my annoying friend whispered it to me when they received the telegram. I had a lot of annoying things during this movie. But honestly, I thought that Koichi was going to die. And is the lesson of the film really gonna be death? Instead, it would make more sense that the message of the film is life. Also, this really just makes a statement against the mentality of the kamikaze pilot and just the mentality of the Japanese army and government during World War II. The true meaning of this film is that life is precious, and you should strive to survive and save others. Overall, they went for the happiest ending possible. And you know what? I'm fine with that. Could you really imagine if Koichi died for nothing? Because we all know that Godzilla's gonna survive and there's gonna be a sequel. Also, so what if the ending is happy? You know, it's a movie. We could use some joy. Not everything has to remind us of reality. And around Christmas and this time of the year, you know, what better message than something like this? The movie's final frames then show chunks of Godzilla's disintegrated flesh and it's sinking into the sea. But as it does, it begins to bubble. And like we've seen previous in the film, this shows Godzilla's ability to regenerate. And it's also the implication that a new Godzilla may evolve from these pieces of flesh. The version of Godzilla in this film is technically dead, given that his entire body broke apart, but the film leaves Godzilla's future intentionally unknown, so we're not quite sure what's going to happen. But it is implied that there's going to be a sequel. If Godzilla's body continues to regenerate, the question is, could it recreate Godzilla's full form? If so, would that creature have the same memories? Or would it be a new Godzilla, and maybe one that's more good like the ones we've seen in the other films? And if the same Godzilla did come back, now it's real motivation for him to have vengeance, and that could be really cool in the next film. Director and writer Takashi Yamazaki has already expressed interests in making a sequel, but it remains to be seen if it will be a follow-up. And you also have to keep in mind that Toho made an agreement to work with the MonsterVerse's schedule. But just given the film's very high ratings and reviews, it's broken all types of records, I think a sequel is definitely very likely. The movie itself has multiple messages in it. Godzilla is the ultimate symbol of fear that gripped Japan in 1947. And even you could apply it to now. But at the time in Japan, there was a fear of more nuclear destruction. And there was even fear of the Soviets. And that's also mentioned in the film multiple times. And this fear is what Godzilla originally symbolized back in the original 1954 film. There was a real fear of just how exposed they felt. Just having their military power just taken away from them, losing a major war. There was also that underlying fear that just the psychological and physical damage done by the war would never heal. Another major theme of the film is just hope for the future and lasting trauma. Throughout the film, you can see trauma manifesting itself in several forms. The most obvious is Koichi's survivor's guilt. Koichi is able to escape death on 3 significant occasions, and he also suffers from just a really aggressive form of imposter syndrome. This is where he questions whether or not he's even really alive. And trauma in this film is just shown on such a massive scale. The entire Japanese population at this point carries some kind of inner pain from the war. And I also like how it shows that the soldiers are feeling this way too. This is one of very few films I've seen that show any humanity applied to the Japanese soldiers. And I like how the film just shows that they've had enough at this point. They don't want any more battle. They just want to move on with their life. While the civilians who remained in Japan during the war, they suffered their own unimaginable losses. And we see this mentioned with the fire bombings, the nuclear attacks. All this just brought Japan and its people to its knees. Each citizen has their own unique variations, but trauma was a universal condition for the people of Japan at this point in their history. The other message in the film is hope for the future. The child Akiko, she acts as the representation for all the children who will be born and grow up in the ashes of World War II in Japan. It's really for those children that Koichi and his fellow veterans step up to fight Godzilla. And it's all just so that they have a chance at a future, and they could finally rebuild Japan. And as we saw, the character of Tachibana, him including the ejector seat in Koichi's plane, this symbolizes how hope is born from establishing a new status quo, and not clinging to the self-destructive tendencies of Japan's past. The film's final resolution does come with some pretty powerful underlying messages, and this really just makes this film the most serious out of any of the Godzilla films. The only other one that comes close is the original, but I think this is even more serious. And this one just has a lot more emotion. And it really just addresses the disregard that the Japanese government had for its people. Koichi's refusal to execute a kamikaze mission earns him shame. But by the end of the film, his decision is supported by those who know they all deserved better. They deserve better than to be sacrificial lambs, dying for no purpose, nothing other than outdated notions of honor and duty. The other major message of the movie's ending speaks not only to Japan post-war, but also to today. The movie's veterans and citizens, they both come together and work together to find a solution to stop Godzilla, and ultimately just to build a better future. That's the key takeaway. The only way that a country and society can move on is to come together and rebuild, and people need to start helping each other. Godzilla Minus One is really just a deep film. There's so many underlying messages to it. It's not just a movie about a giant monster, there's a lot. It applies to the past, it applies to now. And while Godzilla will always be the star, you always see him on the cover of the movies, with this movie it's really about the people. And it's really a powerful human story. Godzilla Minus One is no doubt a really well-made film. I hope it gets some Oscars. I think it's easily Best Picture. And it's also kind of interesting how this year the two biggest films had to do with the atomic bombs. Anyway, Godzilla Minus One is just a great revival to the franchise, and I can't wait to see what they do next. Anyway, let me know what you guys thought in the comments. Thanks for watching.